In this video tutorial, we will be discussing about the internal structure of the dicot root. For this, we are considering the example of root part of helianthus. Helianthus is a sunflower, or we can also consider the plant that is sisal. So if you just observe the plant body, the outermost layer surrounding the plant is nothing but the epidermis. Either the root, leaf, stem, flower, fruit, any part of the plant body is covered with a layer, we call it as a epidermis. So this epidermis is acting as the outermost layer of the plant body. The main function of this epidermis is protecting the internal parts from the external environment. So this layer will be containing a barrel shaped cells or rectangular shaped cells which are tightly packed without any intercellular spaces, and they will be giving some of the outgrowths. Those are called as the root hairs. As we know that the main function of root is to absorb the water from the soil. So all the water and minerals will be absorbed by the root hair, which are extending. These are the extending growths of this epidermal layer. So let us see. This layer of cells is epidermis. The outgrowths of this epidermis is called as the root hair. The main function of root hair is to absorb water and minerals from the soil. Water and minerals are absorbed, or you can say that mineral water is absorbed, the water loaded with the minerals and salts. So the soil water will be absorbed through this root hair. And all the epidermal cells may contain the root hair, may not contain the root hair. The cells which are containing the root hair of this epidermis, those are called as the piliferous cells. The cell of the epidermis which is helpful for the growth of this root hair, we call it as a piliferous cell. As the piliferous cells are present in this epidermis region, the epidermis is also called as piliferous layer. It is having many names. The piliferous layer is also called as epiblemma. Epi means upon the outermost, blemma is the layer-like structure. As the root hairs are arised from this epidermis region, this is also called as rhizodermis. Is also called as the rhizodermis. The main function of this epidermis region is to protect the inner tissues. So how these cells are present? These cells will be containing either tabular or rectangular cells. This layer of cells are considered as the living cells, and they are tightly packed without any intercellular spaces and will be containing the vacuolated protoplast. Vacuolated protoplast and the nucleus are present. These type of cells are forming the outermost layer of the plant body. We call it as a epidermis. So when we are just going below to this epidermis, we have a region called as the cortex. Now, if you just see, as we are discussing about the root part, we cannot find any chloroplast in this region. So this epidermis region doesn't contain any chloroplast. And coming to this below region, below the epidermis, we have a region of cells, parenchymatous cells, which are arranged forming a tissue called as the cortex. So this cortex in this root region will be divided into the three parts. The layer of cells which are present near to this epidermis region is called as the exodermis. Below the exodermis, we have a few layer of cells called as general cortex. Below the general cortex, a layer surrounds the pericycle or the stele. We call it as the endodermis. So generally the cortex region of this root will be containing the three parts. One is exodermis, middle layer is cortex, general cortex, and the third layer is the endodermis. So let us go with each layer description. So the first layer, just below this epidermis, the layer we call it as the exodermis. So this layer we are mentioning it as exodermis. This exodermis is the outermost layer of the cortex. This is outermost layer of cortex. So usually cortex region is divided into exodermis, and the remaining region is the general cortex. There are a layer of cells which are surrounding the steel, like pericycle vascular bundles. We call it as the endodermis. So we will be discussing about this endodermis specially because in the root the main function will be performed by this endodermis just to guide the water transportation, how the water is reaching the xylem, like what are the structures we can find in this endodermis region will be explained here. So usually the root part of the cortex will be containing all these three, the outer few layers which are present below the epidermis, we call it as the exodermis, remaining region is cortex, and the third region which surrounds the steel, we call it as the endodermis. Now this exodermis is considered as the outermost layer, will be of 2 to 3 layers in thickness. 2 to 3 layer of cells are arranged, and the cells which are present here, they will be containing very thick walls. How the thickness is attained by these walls is they are actually made up of a material called as suberin. The cells, 2 to 3 layer of cells which are present below this epidermal region are actually containing the suberin, and suberin is not present at the cells which are near to this root hair region. Suppose let us say wherever the root hair is there, this region, here. So these region of cells are not suberized. There is no suberin is present wherever the root hair is present. Remaining all the cells are containing the suberin in their cell wall. The reason is suberin is impermeable to water. If the suberin is present, water cannot be transported. But water has to be transported to the lower regions of this. So that's the reason, as the water is absorbed through this root hair, the cells which are present near the root hair, they are not containing any suberin. Remaining cells are containing the suberin to avoid the backward flow of the water after the absorption. So 2 to 3 layers of the thick walled suberized cells are present, and you cannot find suberin. There is no suberin at the or near the root hair region, because if all the cells are suberized, the water cannot be absorbed by this. And the main function of this layer along with the epidermis, it is also providing the mechanical strength and support to the root. And along with that, how it supports, usually the function of epidermis is to provide the support. Whenever the epidermis is damaged or get rid of or sloughed off, in that conditions this exodermis is taking the role of epidermis and providing strength to this. And the layer of the suberized cells, they will not allow the water exit from the cortex after absorption. So that's the function of exodermis. Coming to this cortex, the second region is the cortex, and below the cortex we have the third region, that is endodermis. So this general cortex region, the region which is present between the exodermis and the endodermis is called as the cortex region. This is the region between the exo and endodermis is called as the general cortex. So usually it is a multi-layered part. The cells which are present in this mainly of the parenchymatous cells. It is multi-layered parenchymatous cells will be containing a clear or the prominent nuclei, and you can find the gaps between these. So these spaces are called as intercellular spaces. You can find the gaps in between the cells, or these spaces are called as intercellular spaces. All the cells are slightly loosely packed. These are not so tight. Intercellular spaces can be seen here. And all the cells are of the round shaped, few may be the oval shaped. The main function of this general cortex is for the lateral conduction of water from the root head to the xylem vessels. These are helpful for lateral conduction of water, the water which is absorbed from the root hair, and that has to be transported to the xylem vessels so that whole plant can get the absorbed water. So that function is performed by this cortex. And most of this general cortex cells, as it is made up of parenchyma, it will also contain the leucoplast. It is helpful for the storage of materials. And coming to the third region of this cortex, we call it as the endodermis. So this endodermis is considered as the innermost layer of the cortex. It is the innermost layer of cortex. Outermost layer is the exodermis. Innermost layer is the endodermis. And the cells which are present in this endodermis region, they are of the barrel shaped cells, and all these cells are tightly packed without any intercellular spaces. You cannot find any spaces here. And when we are discussing about this endodermis, we need to understand the mode of transportation of the water. So let us try to draw. This is the one outermost layer of the cell which we are drawing. Let us say this is of epidermis. Below the epidermis, the region of cells are present. Those are called as the cortex. So here we are just drawing the cortex region of cell. And the cytoplasmic connections which are established between the cells are called as plasmodesmata. So these connections are the plasmodesmata. And next to this cortex, we have one more region of cell called as the endodermis. So this layer of cell is the endodermis. So let us say this is of the cortex, this is of endodermis. Below this endodermis, we have a layer which surrounds a vascular bundle that is called as the pericycle. So this layer of cell is pericycle. So here I am just mentioning this is the pericycle. So as we are discussing this particular structure, whatever the endodermis we drew here will have one type of specialized thickenings in their cell wall. These thickenings are actually of materials lignin as well as a suberin. So these thickenings are ligno-suberized thickenings. So these ligno-suberized thickenings are called as Casparian strips. These are called as Casparian strips or Casparian thickenings. These are found in the endodermis region. So this part inner to this pericycle, we all know that it will be containing a tissue which is helpful for the transportation of water. So all the water will be transported in this. These are xylem vessels. So in the xylem, the vessels are the structures which are helpful for the water transportation. And from this epidermal region, there will be a hair-like outgrowth which is helpful for the absorption of water. We call it as root hair. So this is the root hair surrounded with the soil particles and the soil water. Epidermis, cortex, endodermis, pericycle, xylem. and the connections which are present between the each cell is called as the cytoplasmic connections or plasmodesmata. So let us see all the cells are arranged in this way. Now, the function of root hairs is to absorb the water. The water which is absorbed from this root hair region will be entering the epidermal cells. So let us say water entered the epidermal cells. From the epidermal cells through this plasmodesmata, it reached the cortex. And through the plasmodesmata, and the water reaches from cortex to endodermis. From endodermis to the pericycle. And from here to the xylem. So if you are seeing here, each cell is a plant cell will be containing the cell wall and the cytoplasm. Let us say this is of the cytoplasm. The connections which are well established between the cytoplasm of each cell. So after the absorption of water, the water is transporting through the cytoplasm of all the cells, finally reaching the xylem. And in the xylem, we will be having the unidirectional way of transportation of water. So this pathway, if the water is transporting through all the cytoplasm of epidermis, cortex, endodermis, pericycle, finally reaching the xylem for the transportation, this pathway is called as symplastic pathway. So water can transport in a symplastic pathway or the symplast. And there is a one more method. The water which is absorbed through this root hair, I'm just changing the colors here. So it will not enter directly the cytoplasm. First it enter the cell wall of this epidermis. Through the cell wall of epidermis, it reach the cell wall of cortex. Through the cortex, it reached the cell wall of endodermis. Once it reached the endodermis, the water cannot move further because it is made up of lignosuberine material. These are called as Casparian strips. They are impermeable to water. It doesn't allow the water. So that's the reason whatever the water transporting in all these cell wall, it should go back to the cytoplasm of this endodermis. Once it reached the cytoplasm, it passed through the plasmodesmata and reached the pericycle. After reaching the pericyclic cytoplasm, it reached the xylem vessel, so the water can be transported. If the water is transporting through the cell wall of all these epidermis, cortex, endodermis, pericycle, then the pathway is called as the apoplastic pathway. Apoplastic pathway or apoplast. So the water takes the two different types of pathway. One is symplastic pathway, or in general term we call it as symplast, where the water is transporting through the cytoplasm of all the cells. Apoplastic pathway or the apoplast, where the water takes the transportation through the cell wall. So what is the use of this Casparian strips? Whatever the water is transporting, if Casparian strips are absent, the water goes to the endodermis of this cell wall of endodermis. Then it reaches the cell wall of pericycle. Instead of reaching the xylem, it will go back to the cell wall of this pericycle, endodermis, cortex, epidermis. So the water is keep on circulating in the cell wall. So that's the reason we are having this Casparian strips. The main function of this endodermis is to guide the water so it can reach the xylem for the further transportation. So that's the function of it. And in this endodermis region, all the cells are not containing the Casparian strips. Few cells doesn't contain the Casparian strips. Those cells are called as the passage cells. In this case, we have some cells called as passage cells where there is no Casparian strips. If the Casparian strips are absent or the thickenings are absent, those cells are called as the passage cells. So the cells with Casparian strips, cells without the Casparian strips, both are the cells present in the endodermis region. So this is considered as the innermost layer of cortex, and it is helpful for the transportation, and it covers the or it surrounds the pericycle. So we'll discuss about the inner layer of this endodermis is the pericycle. So I'll be drawing these cells. These are also slightly barrel shaped cells, a single layer. So if you are seeing here, epidermis is single layer, endodermis is also single layer, pericycle is also single layer. Only the cortex region is containing the many layers. So the next region is pericycle. So inside of this pericycle, xylem and phloem are the tissues present here. So let us try to draw. There will be a xylem which is arranged like the patches. So it is arranged like a separate strand. Suppose if you see xylem is on the one radius and the phloem is on the another radius. So let us say the xylem is present in this way, and in between the phloem is present. So whatever the phloem region we are considering here, which contains all the uh, complex cells of this phloem, companion cells, sieve elements like sieve cells, sieve tubes, phloem fibers, phloem parenchyma, all these are present in this cells which we are drawing here. So the xylem is on the one radius, phloem is on the another radius. Now let us go with this pericycle. So this pericycle is the outer layer of the stele. So we are considering this as the outermost layer of the stele, and which is present below to this, below the endodermis. We call it as the pericycle. What is meant by stele? Usually the pericycle, the vascular bundles like xylem and phloem, and the central region, medulla, all these three are collectively called as the stele. So the function of pericycle is to cover the vascular bundles, and we can find only the single layer of cells which are tightly packed or compactly arranged. So due to its compactness, we cannot find any intercellular spaces. So you cannot find any intercellular spaces in between these cells. And the cells are very smaller in size, maybe rectangular, and the wall of these cells are thin walled. So the cells which are present in this pericycle, they are thin walled parenchymatous cells. So these parenchyma cells of this pericycle region, they will have the ability to divide. So these cells have the ability to divide. We'll be discussing about this pericycle, how it is useful for the secondary growth of the plant. So this is only the structure. It will give rise to the lateral roots. So we have discussed about the reasons of root and the root systems. Lateral roots are developed during the maturation region, that is because of this pericycle, and it is also helpful for the secondary growth of root. So the parenchyma cells which are present in this pericycle region will be containing a prominent nucleus and the dense cytoplasm. So all these type of characteristic cells are present in this pericycle region. So below this pericycle, we have the vascular bundle. So let us go with the xylem. So I'm just mentioning it here. The xylem is of the two types: primary xylem, secondary xylem. So usually the first formed xylem is called as primary xylem, and the xylem which is formed later to this primary xylem is called as the secondary xylem. Usually based on the arrangement and based on their formation, even in the primary, we have protoxylem and metaxylem. So first we'll go with the primary xylem. The small cells which I draw in a smaller size at the down bottom. So this is the first formed xylem, that is a protoxylem, which is a part of primary xylem. And here these are metaxylem, which is formed later to the protoxylem. So these two are the parts comes under the primary xylem. Now, based on the arrangement of this protoxylem and metaxylem, we will say the arrangement as exarch and endarch. So let us see what are these. Usually, if the protoxylem, based on the position of protoxylem, we are going to use these terms. In this diagram, the protoxylem is towards the peripheral side, whereas the metaxylem is towards the center side. If the protoxylem is facing towards the peripheral, that type of xylem we call it as the exarch type of xylem. This is exarch type of xylem as the protoxylem is facing towards the peripheral. If the protoxylem faces towards the center, it is called as a endarch type of xylem. Now, the main function of this xylem tissue is to transport the water, as we discussed the transportation pathway, apoplastic and symplastic pathway. Once it reaches the xylem, the water will be transported to the remaining parts of the plant body. So due to the arrangement of this protoxylem and metaxylem, we can see the exarch type of xylem. And we cannot find any a structure called as a cambium in between the xylem and phloem. And this xylem arrangement is called as centripetal type of arrangement, or all the xylem is arranged in centripetal manner in the exarch condition. And you can see the 4 strands of xylem here. That's why this xylem is also called as tetrarch. So yeah, so as the 4 strands of this xylem are arranged, so that's why we are calling it as a tetrarch type of xylem, which means 4 strands of xylem alternate with 4 strands of phloem. And the tissue which is present between these two, so you can find this whole white color part. All this white color part of tissue is also the parenchyma. We call this as conjunctive parenchyma. So this yellow colored cells which are present between the xylem strands as well as the phloem is called as conjunctive parenchyma. So we will be discussing what is the function of this as well. So this is the ground tissue of the steel, the remaining whole part wherever the vascular bundles are not there. So in between the vascular bundles of xylem and phloem, you can find a tissue called as this conjunctive parenchyma. The main function of this conjunctive parenchyma is to absorb the, no, as it is a parenchyma, it is helpful for the storage. The function is for the storage. So usually it forms the vascular cambium during the secondary growth. We will be discussing what is secondary growth separately. Now, here, after the xylem, these structures are called as the phloem. So let us go with it. What is meant by phloem? We all know that the phloem function is to transport the food material. For the conduction of food, transportation of food, we require a tissue called as the phloem. So this phloem is also present as a patches, are alternately arranged with this xylem. That's why we are calling it as the exarch type of xylem. And this type of vascular bundle, 4 strands of xylem, 4 strands of phloem, we call it as radial type of vascular bundle. As the xylem and phloem are arranged on the 2 different radii, they are not adjacent to each other but alternate to each other. This type of vascular bundle, we call it as the radial type of vascular bundle. And the central region where the conjunctive parenchyma is present, that region is called as the medulla. So let us see what is the function of this medulla. So this medulla is the center part of the steel surrounded by this vascular tissue. This is a center region or the center part of the stele is surrounded by vascular bundle. We call it as the medulla. So this medulla may be the absent or scanty. Scanty means very small in size. So during the secondary growth, it will be crushed and it is forming a very small region. And the main function of this medulla is to store the water as well as food. It stores water and food. So let us go with how the secondary growth can be seen and what type of vascular bundle it is. So as we are saying, this particular dicot root, all the xylem and phloem are arranged like a strands alternate to each other, not on the same radii. This is called as radial vascular bundle. And the xylem is showing the tetrarch type of arrangement, and it is also shows the exarch type of arrangement. So exarch is a protoxylem is peripheral and the metaxylem is towards the medulla side. And these are not containing any cambium in the initial stages. So before showing the secondary growth, cambium is absent. So that's the reason these vascular bundles are said to be a closer type of vascular bundles as cambium is absent. If the cambium is present, then they are said to be a open type of vascular bundles. So let us see how this cambium is actually formed.